Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Recruiter of Oz podcast.
Yes.
So, after the week break we took to solemnly observe Juneteenth, we are back today with a shorter episode, but I think it's an important one from the candidate perspective. Mark will probably have some interesting insights from his perspective because in this particular case, we may be at odds in some situations. And the topic for today is basically recruiters or hiring managers asking candidates to perform work during the interview process. Mark, sounds like something that you've ever done?
Yes, I have. I have actually. So
you suck.
So a couple things. I mean, this is widespread across many industries.
Right.
For instance, if you are hiring software engineers, you're not just going to interview them and ask, "Hey, can you do this?" and ask them questions. You actually are going to say, like, "Oh, cool, you can do it. Well, good. Show me a little bit of what you can do."
Yes.
And so that's when they whip out the whiteboard. They give you a Sharpie, right. And
But now there are things that are okay. And with situations like that where you have to prove the expertise and knowledge of a person such as a software programmer, that's a big deal. And you have to be confident that the person that you're going to have as the final hire is going to be able to come in and do the job. I get that. But what I'm really talking about is that more detailed deep dive that a hiring manager or recruiter requests, such as, okay, I'm going to use me again as an example because it's all about me, isn't it?
Sure.
Oh, and to quote Beaches, enough about me. What do you think of me, darling? But anyway, so here's the thing. In communications, a lot of times I've seen it happen more and more often. If you're a writer, if you're a marketer, if you're a PR person or AR, a lot of times that hiring manager is going to want you to prove your mettle, right? And they're going to ask you during the interview process, "Hey, we would like you to put together either an article, or we want you to draft up a press release, or we want you to put together a plan and walk us through it." That's fine. I understand the intent behind that, but there are points where it gets to be an unreasonable ask. And I think that the key thing here is to understand really what is reasonable and what is unreasonable. Right. And each of us are going to have kind of different operational definitions for each of those. But I think that in my mind, where I start seeing things as unreasonable is when a company will ask for, if I'm interviewing for a PR role, but this was years ago, and they say, "Hey, write a press release for a current client of ours for this product that they're going to release." Okay, first of all, that violates so many NDA rules that I can't even tell you, but it's happened. It's happened on a few occasions. So I actually had this request probably 10 years ago, and it was to write a press release for a new product that was going to be announced at the upcoming Consumer Electronics Show. And so I did. And I did a bit of research. They gave me some talking points. I wrote a full press release that was basically usable. And this was about mid through my career at that point. And I went through the interview process. I was reasonably confident that I'd done well and that I was going to get a job offer, but I was wrong and my confidence was misplaced. However, after the job was offered to someone else, I noticed that press release, almost verbatim, with the exception of a couple of little tweaked words, nothing substantive, was released under the company to announce that new product. Now, here's the problem with that. When you create something, if you're not under the binding contract, and this is from my perspective, so Mark, I'd like you to chime in and tell me how off base I am, but in my mind, when you create something on behalf of a company to basically demonstrate your ability and your understanding of a specific area and an approach to a given piece of content, and it's used and you're not hired, what's up with that? And I'm going to tell you what happened afterward, after I hear what your thoughts are, Mark.
Well, I mean, if it's like a finished product like that, which is that was probably a weird request on their part. Like they could have probably gotten an idea of your like writing style and other nuances without asking for a finished product. But let's say they actually just messed up and they got the finished product. Well, then technically you're an outside like consultant and they have to pay you.
Right. I like how you think. So it's funny you say that because I was really, really incensed. Let's put it that way. And many expletives went through my head when I saw that. And I'm thinking, wow, I don't even know what to do about this. So what I ended up doing was putting together a demand letter and an invoice and saying, okay, so for this work that you've used, I'm going to bill you for my normal rate for press releases, which at that time was $400. And I sent them the invoice. And I didn't think anything of it, but it was basically me putting my foot down to prove a point. Okay, you used my IP. You did not hire me. So basically, you've acted in bad faith by taking my content. That's basically plagiarism when you put your name on what I wrote. Yeah. And if I am not a company employee. So interestingly enough, and I will give this company a lot of credit, I got a check in the mail 2 weeks later. So that was, the most profitable non-hire job interview process I'd ever been through. It was pretty cool.
That is cool. So so I'm sure they made some changes after that. There are
very few. I was that good.
No, to their process.
Oh, so, maybe, yeah.
So companies, depending on the company, will have like very good ways to assess their candidates. Like, in other words, like if they're, again, I'm going back to the software engineer thing, but this could be for anything. Like they're going to ask a software engineer to solve like a hypothetical problem, but it's not like literally like they're not going to like show them the code of what the company is working on and say, hey, work on this. Because again, violates like all kinds of like rules. Right. Proprietary information, like the stuff could be stolen. Like, so in other words, you don't show them that stuff, but instead you show them like a difficult problem that they might encounter theoretically, and then you get them to work on it. There's no product, there's nothing that's happening, but instead you're just seeing the mechanics of how this person might think on the job and how they might act.
So basically there should be no benefit to the business for that project that interviewee does. Yeah. So that's a very important distinction, Mark. And I think that it gets lost in the shuffle depending on what you're doing. So in my situation, it was usable because they wanted to get that value and they didn't have to put together that release and they could bill for it. But I think that's kind of key there. So if someone comes up and asks you, again, we're going back to communications because that's what I know. If they ask you for a calendar year plan encompassing all aspects of a program that you would put together as candidate if selected for the role, and you do that's kind of where it gets questionable because you can't really prove if they're using it or not. But is that an unreasonable ask? Because I mean, as you know, Mark, well, maybe you do or maybe you don't, but when you're putting together a year plan, okay, well, let me tell you, when I'm doing that takes a minimum of 20 hours because there's a lot of data points to pull in. There's a lot of research to be done. And it's not something that is super easy to do. So still, that's your IP. I think that a good approach, if a company wants to do that, is like Mark said, you make it so it's not going to directly benefit the business, and it's something that is purely an exercise. But with that, in that respect, it should also not be a super heavy lift like a 20-hour project. I mean, there's no justification for that. I think that if I'm doing something like that, I try not to with candidates. It's going to be kind of taking the approach that you take with an intern, because when you're not paying an intern, say if you're at a 503C or whatever the nonprofits are.
Yes.
Basically, if you're bringing on a free intern, you can't have them legally doing work that helps the business. You basically model types of projects that they would do so they would learn on the job and they would have the resources around to provide input and help them guide them to the right approach to doing something. And Mark, if I'm wrong again, just jump in, please.
Well, no, but making coffee is a benefit to the business.
It is. That's true. That's true. And getting donuts, I mean, those are things that I'm okay with, as long as, the candidate themselves gets the benefit as well. But yeah,
so I will say this, that I do actually encounter that in like the job searching that I've done in actually many years in the past. So
okay.
I'll get, and it also depends on the roles that you're applying for. Because if you were, let's say, a talent acquisition specialist or like, a recruiter, they wouldn't ask you to do as much in terms of the interview. But because of the roles that I look at, which are like, manager or leadership or like director type roles,
right,
what you're going to be doing on the job is different. And so that you can't just come in and say like, oh yeah, I know how to do that. And then they're like, great, you're hired. Right. It's not gonna work like that.
No.
So the questions you get asked, depending on the company, it could be like, how would you plan this out? How would you plan, upskilling the entire org, or, what is your hiring plan for like the org for the entire year? Right. And so you have to come up with an idea. And sometimes, like I interviewed at one company, they shall remain nameless.
Okay.
They said, they said, just come up with a presentation on how you would do this, hire this many engineers in this amount of time with this amount of people. And the presentation, you're going to present it over the course of, to 6 different people. And the presentation should be about an hour. I mean, that's not like something that you would just be like, okay, and then write it in 5 minutes. Like, you're going to think about it, and you're going to plan, and you're going to kind of do the work.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that goes across the board with any number of different roles across any number of different industries and organizations. How much work's involved? So I was reading a really good article from Inc. magazine, or it's online now, but it's called How to Respond When Hiring Managers Ask You to Work for Free. And this, touches on a lot of these things. And I was reading through it and I'm thinking, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's not something, things that I would have necessarily immediately jumped to, but they have 4 specific points if you're asked to do work for free during an interview process. And the first of those points is find out from the hiring manager how much time they really think it's going to take to complete. There may be a total disparity between how much time the hiring manager thinks and how much time it will actually take, given that they may not be the one doing that execution in-house. They're managing the projects. The second thing is you don't have the background that you're going to need. So basically you're starting with lack of resources that you're going to have to make up. And so you want to find that out, first of all, and then you can kind of decide, okay, is this a reasonable request and something that I feel that I am going to benefit from fulfilling? The second thing they say is basically to ask the hiring manager, well, be polite about it, but how they're going to use the information in the event you aren't chosen for the job. Now, this would have been key for me 10 years ago when I was writing an actual press release for a new product. I mean, that was probably not a good choice on the company.
Now they're going to have ChatGPT do it. So
yeah, right. Hey, easy peasy. But ask, how are they going to use that? Are they going to actually use it in their day-to-day work process? Is that going to be something that they implement into what they do? And if that's the case, you really need to insert, hey, this is going to be my IP. So if you don't basically choose me, will I be compensated for it? And there's another kind of data point that's going to help hopefully inform your decision as to whether to move forward in the process or not, or try to negotiate for something that's a little bit different, that may not be as easy to repurpose for their own use.
Yeah. So you said 2 things there, though. So I think the first one is the time that the hiring manager says it takes to do the work.
Yeah.
So a couple things. I think most of the time, whether or not they think it will take that much time or not, the hiring team or the recruiter or the hiring manager will say, "Oh, this should not take you long at all. Just spend like 30 minutes on it." I think they always say that. Like I don't think I've heard of like where they're like, just like, oh no, this is going to take you all day to work on. Like, no one's ever said that, even if you do take that much time. So I think there's a reason why they do that. I think it's because like they're not trying to make you work for free, like work 8 hours on something like that.
Right.
Or B, they want something simpler and you're thinking I've got to do something totally complex and you're going to nitpick over every detail. Now, there's probably truth somewhere in between those 2 things.
Right. Absolutely. So have a better understanding from your perspective what is going to take to do that project, and then you can kind of weigh that with what the hiring manager is saying. And I think, Mark, before we had this call, you had made an interesting comment, and I think it's worth mentioning here, in that a candidate, being as hyper aware as they are and as sometimes desperate as they are to get a job, are going to hear things and then they're going to extrapolate out, okay, what is that hiring manager actually asking for? And so that candidate's looking at, okay, crap, I have to put this whole framework and plan together, and it has to be comprehensive and focus on the next calendar year and whatnot, when a hiring manager may only be asking for kind of bullet points on how you would approach a plan, or putting a plan together. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I mean, you could be thinking like, a full plan, details, like names, numbers, dollar figures. And the hiring manager's like, really, all they wanted was like, a forward slide that said like, plan, do, celebrate, or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So it's you've got to probably clarify that. But also at the same time, even if you do clarify it and they're like, oh, no, simpler is better. Now think about all the other candidates that are interviewing along with you, and think, if they're all doing the same thing and we're all kind of saying the same thing, well, then how do I make myself stand out? And then that's when you start to, so all those things that you're thinking, which could make you stand out as a candidate. Yeah, that's fine. It could. But that means if it adds more time to your plate, that's kind of on you. That's actually not on
it. It is on you, yes.
So,
but then, I mean, I think the next step that Inc. suggested was a good one, in that if you're asked to do, say, a full plan on numerous elements within a framework for a given discipline, okay, was that nebulous enough? They say, do only a partial deep dive to prove your abilities. So you have, say, writing, content creation, SEO, social media, you have media relations, you have technical analyst relations and such.
Right.
So you would take one section out of that and you would kind of do a thorough dive into that section, as opposed to doing a whole plan with a deep dive into everything. So what you're effectively doing is kind of giving them a taste of what you're capable of, and how you approach a given program by giving them that one little slice of, okay, here's the deep dive.
Right. So in other words, it's kind of like, the first hit's for free, here's a taste, and then the rest.
First one's always free.
So that's a good idea, actually, because, I mean, now granted, if you do this and you do a deep dive on like a certain aspect of the project and you're thorough, make sure you list all of the other things and say, hey, you know what, I'll do the same thing with these, if I get hired. Now, you also probably want to make sure that like whatever one that you chose to do this kind of like partial deep dive, make sure it's the one that they really want. Because you could also do a deep dive on something you think, this will be great. And they actually wanted another point that you just kind of glossed over. And then that could hurt your candidacy.
That's a good point.
So it's a good idea to find out, again, just communicate with the hiring manager. Yeah. Which are of these 4 things that you listed to me that you want to see in this document or this presentation, which is like the top thing that's like key to this role. And then that's the one that you do.
And the more clarifying questions you ask, the more aligned you're going to be with the intent and the needs of that hiring manager. So, good advice, total good advice. And then finally, though, I think this is the key right here. Do not provide documents that can be easily changed and repurposed by an employer. Label everything with your name and the date, every page that you do. And basically that reinforces that message that this is my IP. If you want to use it, you're going to pay for it. And then, I mean, you don't want to be, standoffish about it, but that's the message. And I'd recommend, basically create PDFs with that watermark so that, again, they can't repurpose it easily.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. I've actually done that. So I've had to create a presentation and then in PowerPoint put a watermark on all the slides, and then you save it as a PDF, and then it's like stuck, right? The text is stuck with the watermark, and you just have to read it.
Exactly. So do you have any other thoughts? I mean, in addition to what they said on kind of.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a big deal because, I've hired a lot of people too for my own industry. And there are plenty of people who say that they're a good sourcer or a good recruiter. And in the interview, I can like put something in front of them and say, okay, cool. write me a search string for this role, or
Right.
tell me what this role is all about, and give them the time to look at it, read it, research it, or whatever. But if they can't do it, then that could be a problem. If like on the job, they're going to get like 20 new roles a day,
Yeah.
just like that. And they're all different. Right. So it's like,
Right.
sometimes you do need to see them in action, right? Because if you don't, then you're just going to watch them kind of like stumble in real time on the
Yeah.
job.
Then I've done that, and it's not pretty.
Yeah.
So that makes absolute sense. But I mean, really, when you're sitting in a situation like write a search string versus write a full plan, there's a huge difference between those two
There
things.
is. Yeah,
So,
for sure.
yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's good. I think we kind of touched on the solution, which is basically communicate with the hiring
Right.
team, ask the right questions, ask what's the most important thing to focus on, and then highlight that in a deep dive in your work.
Right. Absolutely. So the last thing I want to bring up is also the other side of this coin, and where the pendulum has swung the other direction. And I apologize ahead of time. I'm not trying to hate on any generations, but I have been the hiring manager of Gen Z people.
Oh, no.
And I've been reading a lot of memes about Gen Z's interaction with hiring managers, especially where it pertains to being asked to do any work or even send thank you notes from interviews. This blew my freaking mind, let me tell you. And in fact, just to that last point, I saw a meme from a Gen Zer saying, if they expect me to do any additional work after going through all of those interviews and writing a thank you letter, they're sorely mistaken. I'm not going to do more free work. And I'm thinking, okay.
I'm not going to say hi to you unless you pay me.
No, that's right. You don't get any emails from me. No niceties, no anything. Here's my message to you. People, those in Gen Z who are averse to doing anything extra. You know, I get it, but the thing is, when you're applying for a job that is a salaried position, and you're looking to put a professional front forward to a hiring manager, recruiter, it's always generally a good thing to send out a thank you note. And I get it. You don't want to do extra work. And then I'm gonna extrapolate this a little bit more. I've also been seeing a lot of memes from Gen Z job candidates, and I know I'm picking on the generation. I apologize. Y'all are wonderful. We love you, but there are some things that need to be jiggered a little bit. When you're in a hiring process and the job or the hiring manager says something like, well, okay, and on occasion we'll have you do projects that fall slightly outside of the scope of your job description. And you push back and say, I'm not doing anything outside of what my job description says.
Well, then you're not getting hired.
Yeah. Probably not going to get hired. So while it may go viral for you and you're going to get a lot of people saying, yeah, you're also going to get a lot of people on the outside not commenting, going, oh, crap, are you serious? But that's fine, because you know what? It makes it easier for us to, get the jobs that you would have gotten had you taken that extra step.
That's known as self-selection.
Self-selection. I think I need to have like big neon letters or on here. Self-selection. Provide a link to it. But anyway,
I mean, when you send a thank you note to the interviewers or the hiring manager, it's not just being polite, like, oh my God, I was polite.
Yeah.
It's also continuing to show interest in the job. Unless you don't care about the job, then don't send anything.
Yeah, hey, don't do anything. I'm still having trouble, by the way, going back a number of episodes, Mark, with not sending cover letters. I've not been doing that. I've been getting some hits, as many as I got without the cover letters, which is, it goes along with what you said, but it still strikes me as like, oh, am I doing myself a disservice here? But apparently not, because
when I would run through the applicants for roles at my previous job, sometimes there would be two documents. I knew one was the cover letter. I would never open it. I wouldn't even open it. Like, I would just open the resume, read it, and then make a decision. Like, the cover letter did not factor into it at all.
So that's it's good to know that. There are some times though, there are some companies who say we would like a cover letter from you. And I actually had one of those. I'm like, okay, you're getting a cover letter from me because it was a job that I was like, okay, I need this job. It remains to be seen if I'm going to get a call back, but whatever. But yeah, sometimes cover letters help if they're specifically requested. But
Right.
yeah, I would probably side with Mark at this point because I've had enough job submissions without cover letters that would lead me to believe that, yeah, I'm getting about the same rate of response as I would with a cover letter. So all that time thinking about how to customize cover letters for not. God.
I mean, it's also changed. I mean, granted, I think it's changed a while ago, but I think it's just changed. The expectation is kind of like,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, how much formal do you need? But, whatever. So on that note, I think we've basically covered everything on that whole, what do you do, if asked to perform free work. Mark, do you have any last thoughts or are you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's good to count on the fact that if you do get further or deeper into like the hiring process, that you will get asked to kind of prove it, right? Because anyone can say that they're an expert at something or they're good at doing something, but eventually you got to show it, whatever that is. So just expect that and think about how you can demonstrate that, put yourself in the best light.
Good and sage advice. So with that, we'll wrap this episode up. So I would ask that you like and subscribe if you find any of this information valuable. We try to bring things that are useful to you. And side note, to those of you who are SEO experts who want to help me promote this podcast and make it all, buttoned up, glowy and bright and shiny, we appreciate it, but we're not going for that. If I was going for that, I would produce this. What we're trying to do here is provide kind of a candid approach and candid thoughts on different elements of the job process and working with sources and recruiters. If someone is tuning out because our production quality is not up to par with Hollywood, well, okay, sorry, we missed you, but and then as the next note, in the next episode or the next two episodes, one of those, we're going to be putting together a panel discussion that's going to be focusing on imposter syndrome. Now, this is kind of a follow-on from the conversation we had last time with Jessie, and she's probably going to be returning to speak with us. We're also inviting other people who may have expert experience with this. So ideally, we would love someone who has an organizational psychology background, who's fallen into an HR role, a people role, diversity role, whatever, because to have someone like that be able to speak to the imposter syndrome concept would be pretty valuable, in addition to having Jessie back, because she's got a lot of experience and thoughts on that. So with that, thank you for joining us for this episode of the Recruiter of Odd podcast, the Recruiter of Odd podcast. Let me backtrack on that. The Recruiter of Oz podcast. And I have been Scott. My co-host has been Mark. And we look forward to seeing you the next time around.
All right. See you guys.
Bye-bye.